Let's bring in John McMullen at JF McMullen. He appears with the Boardwalk Honda hotline like all guests of the show. NFL, here we go. Eagles and Packers. And John, I don't have in, who's out. This week's edition, I did not include the Eagles in my wild cards. I have Dallas winning the division, and I'm looking at the math, man. If they lose on Thursday night, the math starts to get a little tricky in that conference because there's 5 undefeated teams in the NFC right now. You walking around that locker room and feeling a playoff team?
Yeah, I still think it's a playoff team. One, because the major injuries are not long-term. Alshon Jeffrey's going to be back. That's pretty clear. He's on track for Week 5 against the Jets. And I think once that happens, I think the Eagles are going to turn things around. It would be helpful if they win this game. It's very difficult to win on the road on Thursday nights anyway. Green Bay's had tremendous success at Lambeau Field, basically, since Aaron Rodgers has taken over. They barely lose at Lambeau when he's healthy. So it's a difficult environment. But the Eagles love this. They love this whole they're underdogs again. You know how that goes. Back to the Super Bowl season, they embraced it. I've talked about that a lot. It was ridiculous. But, hey, if it works for you, use it. And they're already using it. And they're pointing at people like you, Mike, and saying, look, nobody believes in us. I wouldn't be surprised if they went into a spot nobody expects them to win and win this game for 2 reasons. One, they're better than people think, and they have been hurt by the injuries, and they are getting guys back. And 2, people look at 3-0 in Green Bay and think they're really good, but if you look at each individual game, they haven't played that well. And a lot of those 3-0 teams, you look at their schedules, Buffalo, for instance, Dallas, I give credit because they've beaten terrible teams, but they've beaten them handily.
Well, let's stop there for a second. Let me kind of go through, and I'm just looking at the NFC bunch right now. San Francisco's 3-0. Are you a believer that they're in this thing?
No. It's another example. I mean, they're a better team, and I'm not. They're much improved, and they deserve a lot of credit. But I look at their division. The Rams are going to be there. The Seahawks are going to be there. So ultimately, I do think people get a little too hyped up. And so part of it is the difficult aspect of that division outside Arizona. But I think that's a perfect example of another team that ultimately is going to come back to the pack a little bit.
All right, you got Detroit 2-0-1, and they beat you already. So you think they'll fade?
No, they're a terrible team. They're going to fade because they got to play. Number one, they got to play the Bears and the Vikings and the Packers a lot. Again, that's another difficult division where teams are going to sort of beat up on each other. And you've already seen it in Week 2 with Minnesota and Green Bay. Probably Minnesota should have won that game. Green Bay survived. So I think you're going to see a lot of that. Week 1, it was Green Bay and Chicago, and the Packers survived that. But they were real bad offensively against a very good defense. So I think you're going to see that back and forth in that division.
All right. Interesting. And I guess I'm basing it on the fact that if you lose the game on Thursday night and fall to 1-3,
right,
then you're in some. Now you're right now at 1-2. You're all right. But you lose Thursday night at 1-3 with 3 conference losses. That kind of changes the outlook.
It sounds like Mike. John, I was just going to say.
Optimal.
Sorry, John, I'm trying to cut you off. I just wanted to add into the talk about the wild card. Are you basically saying that you don't think the NFC is as deep as it appears?
No, I think the NFC East is still a 2-team division. The Redskins are terrible. You've seen that. The Giants are terrible, although they're a little bit better with Daniel Jones. No question about that. But now Saquon Barkley's going to be out for a while. So that's still a bad football team. North is very strong. I think you could make an argument for all 4 teams to be playoff teams, but all 4 teams are not going to be playoff teams. Obviously, they're going to beat up on each other. So I think that kind of takes care of certain things. and you're going to see losses at some point pile up for certain teams. Same thing with the West, as I just explained. If you have three good teams, well, they got to play each other, so somebody's got to lose those games. And you'll see that kind of take over. So I do think it's very early still. And now it's not good. And you bring up the point that losing three conference games, that would not be helpful down the road.
No.
So I do think it's very important to win this game. And I think it does become much more problematic if they can't get something done. So I do think this is very important. But if they do win this game, I think then all of a sudden they're off and running, and the concern kind of melts away.
I feel better if they win on Thursday night, too. To do so, John McMullen, they need Fletcher Cox to be Fletcher Cox.
Yeah, I talked about that yesterday on the show, and I wrote about it today. I mean, he has just not been himself. And that is, to me, the biggest issue with the defensive line, because he is the guy. He is the superstar player, the straw that stirs the drink, so to speak. And when he's not dominating, that makes things more difficult for everybody else. And conversely, when he is playing like he typically does, he makes things easier for everybody else. So we're through three games. We know the reasons why. He didn't have essentially an off season. He didn't practice at all in training camp. He said he only needed a week before the regular season to play, and that turned out to be true. He had 1 week of practice, but the part that wasn't true, and I've talked about a lot, is he was not going to be 100%. He was not going to be ready to hit the ground running. That has borne out, and that has been the case, and you just hope that switch flicks very, very quickly because until he's healthy, until he's dominating at his usual level, I think you're going to see a continuation of struggles with that pass rush.
Has he been overworked at all, John? Like, I don't have his snap counts directly in front of me. You probably know. Is he overworked? Could he have been incorporated a little bit more slowly? And how can they make it easier on him to see the ball go in the net, so to speak?
No, he's actually played less than he typically does. So he was scaled back for that reason, because they didn't think he was ready to handle his regular workload because he didn't have an off season. So he hasn't been playing as much as he typically does. And now that becomes more difficult. Remember, at the beginning, you had Malik Jackson and Tim Jernigan, and you could afford more of a rotational mentality. Now you don't have that luxury. So it's got to be back to Fletcher playing 75, 80% of the snaps, and not only doing that, but doing it at a high level. I've seen no evidence of him being able to do that at this point, and we'll see how long it takes. Hopefully Thursday is the tipping point, because if it's not, I don't think Hassan Ridgeway is going to make a difference inside. I don't think moving Vinny Curry or Josh Sweat inside is going to make much of a difference. So they need him to be Fletcher, and they need him to be Fletcher really, really quickly.
John, real quick, injuries. Darby looks like he's out, right?
Yeah, he's going to be out, and he's going to be out for a significant period of time, probably about a month, so probably 4 weeks at least.
I think Mosher was talking about this earlier. I might be off, but I thought he said they're 12-3 without him.
He did say that.
Yeah, well, remember, he got hurt week 1 of 2017, the Super Bowl season. So, and then I think he missed 10 games maybe. So they were really good that year. They won a lot of games, obviously. And that kind of skews it. Last year, the torn ACL in November, and the Eagles had the late run with Nick Foles back at quarterback and snuck into the playoffs and then did some damage. So, look, I mean, I understand people can point to that number and say this is better without a healthy Ronald Darby. I don't agree with that. This team is better. Now, the problem is he's not healthy. We just talked about Fletcher, same thing with Darby. Coming back from that torn ACL, he was clearly not comfortable, so maybe there's a silver lining to this. The fact that he's going to miss a month with a hamstring, and through that time, you're further and further off the ACL surgery, so maybe that helps him, and he's ready to go in the back end of the season. But short term, look, hey, Rasul's been playing better, so it's probably better to have Rasul and Sidney Jones in there, although they haven't been playing great, either of them. They've just been playing better than Ronald.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess the configuration that is Rasul, Sidney on the outside, Maddox on the is on the inside is the slot guy. James has been elevated, and Greg Ward has been released. I'm imagining Greg Ward is released because, as you mentioned, it will be Alshon Jeffrey's return. But how do they configure the wideouts with Jeffrey back? Who's that guy on the outside? What do they do with Aguilar here?
Well, Aguilar goes back into the slot. Now, remember, the Eagles are multi-formational, so at times they do have receivers line up. But the vast majority of the time, Alshon will be outside. And Mac Hollins has elevated himself over J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, who's also been dealing with a heel injury as well. He was back as a full participant. It's just, everything's in estimation this week because all you have is walkthroughs because of the Thursday game. So J.J. should be able to go, but Mac has played better. So you figure he'll be the other outside receiver. Nelson will be back in the slot, and that's a good thing because that's where he's most comfortable.
Any creative packages we can anticipate seeing? Sproles in the slot, Sproles and Sanders on the field at the same time, Howard and Sanders. Anything different potentially for Thursday?
Well, I was just talking to Josh off air, and when you're in these weeks, these Thursday weeks, I mean, it is astonishing. And we talk about the poor level of play on Thursday night games. Well, nobody does anything. There's no preparation time. There's no practice time. So if you're wondering why these games stink, that's the reason.
No, I'm not wondering.
Well, yeah, I know you're not. Like, you've been ground floor on that with me. But I'm just saying, when you're up close and you see it, I mean, there's no practice. I just talked about estimation. It's an estimation because they're not practicing. So you basically just show up and play the game, and everybody, guys, goes to their default identity. Now, from the Eagles' perspective, look, they use more formations and more stuff than most teams in this league. So you're talking about having running backs. Look at the Detroit game. There were so many empty sets, 5 receiver sets in that game because they didn't respect Detroit's pass rush. It'll be interesting. You have to respect Green Bay's. That's one of the strengths of their team since they added the Smith brothers. They're not really brothers, but Preston Zadarius Smith. They've been great as edge rushers early in the season. So you would think you have to at least respect that, and you can't go to as many empty sets. But the Eagles, yeah, I mean, that's what they are. They throw a ton of formations at everybody, and even in a short week, they'll do it again.
So, John, I just asked you what changes can we expect, anything new on offense, and essentially your answer is, which is 100% accurate, obviously, I'm not questioning your answer, but short week. Teams don't practice. Not much they can do. So is that frustrating, like, to the coaching staff with the situation that the team's currently in? Does it bode well for them? Does it bode well for the Packers? Like, just with how the chips have fallen, how are they assessing and handling the current situation with a short week coming in a crucial game?
Well, any Thursday night game anywhere bodes well for the home team. I mean, that's just the way it is, and it has been. And gamblers know, typically, unless it's a really, really bad team, you lean towards the home team. So everything on paper trends towards Green Bay. There's no question about that. The only thing I would kind of hang my hat on is what I said. This team loves that underdog role, and they now think they're underdogs. They're never underdogs. They're always favorites because somebody has so many people in this league have so much respect for him at this point, and now they're actually underdogs because you're facing Aaron Rodgers on the road in Lambeau Field against a 3-0 team. But again, as I said, people default to Aaron Rodgers, and they should. He's one of the greatest quarterbacks who has ever lived. But this is probably the worst offense he's had in years and years and years. So when you look at that 3-0, it's probably lying to you a little bit. That team is not nearly as good, certainly offensively. Now, a counterpoint is they're much better defensively. That's also fair to say. They're typically a really bad team defensively. Mike Pettin has done a great job, and they do a lot of different things, and they've added talent. I just mentioned Preston Smith and Zadarius Smith. Jair Alexander, if people don't know him, they're going to know him after Thursday night because he's already one of the best cornerbacks in football. So they have elevated the talent on the defensive side of the ball. But if you can win a 17-14 game, you'll take it.
John McMullen at JF McMullen. A couple more things to dive through here on the injury front. Alshon Jeffrey looks like he'll be back. Ronald Darby, as you mentioned, is out. They could be getting Camus back in this one. I do not see his name popping up. He's a full participant. How does he help out the defense?
Well, I mean, you have to be realistic. I mean, they were expecting Camus to be that second linebacker in the nickel package, so in essence, the second starting linebacker. And he was having a very good training camp when he went down with a sprained MCL. Here he is, week 4. Said he was going to play week 4. He is going to play week 4. It just gives Jim more options on third downs. He's been playing a lot of big nickel. With the extra defensive back, the extra safety on the field. Now he's got that coverage linebacker. That's the strength of Camus' game. And he's probably the best coverage linebacker the Eagles have. So that's helpful. I don't think he's going to play a ton. I think they're going to ease him in because he's been out for so long. But I do think it's helpful. Especially with a team with a quarterback that likes to throw the football, to have a linebacker that can cover. And this is probably the best coverage linebacker the Eagles have.
All right. We also have, as we know, the Thursday night game right here on 97.3 ESPN. It is the Eagles and the Packers. Packers, by the way, have given up, an NFC low at least, 35 points, which is the lowest in the NFC. And we will dive into some of the matchups here throughout the week. John, before we let you run, Washington lost last night. Anticipation of the coach, the quarterback, any changes out there?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think eventually they have to get to Dwayne Haskins. And we talk about all that with any time anybody drafts a quarterback in the first round. You just saw it with the Giants. I mean, there's so much pressure when you're a bad football team. Why are you playing a veteran guy? You got to get the young guy ramped up as quickly as possible. And ultimately, everyone says, well, we want to ease him in, but then you start losing games, and it becomes you got to get the first-round pick on the field. So, yeah, he's going to start very, very soon, whether it's the next game or a few games down the road. And the coach, hey, I think Jay Gruden might want to get fired. I would. There's only 32 of these jobs, but I think Jay's at the point of his career where people understand he's a pretty good coach, and he's hamstrung by the worst ownership situation maybe in the NFL, the worst GM situation. Technically, Bruce Allen is team president, but de facto GM. It's terrible. And they're going to be a bad organization as long as those two are in place. And obviously, Daniel Snyder's not going anywhere. So I feel bad for Jay Gruden. I really do. But there's not much you can do at this point.
All right. John McMullen, of course, with more on this game at 97.3 ESPN.com. By the way, was Nelson Aguilar like a big star in the locker room today?
He was, but he did not speak today, and you'll probably see a clip of him saying he loves us, the media, which he really doesn't. But, obviously because of the social media thing and the guy catching babies, and that was – and by the way, Nelson handled that really well in a really classy fashion and deserves credit. I mentioned that to him today on a personal level, but he did not want to talk to the big media scrum.
Yeah, all right. Well, we'll have that clip for you here in just a second, what the gentleman said. I'm sure if you haven't heard it by now, we'll have it for you in just a couple seconds. But, John, all right, man, tomorrow we'll have more on this Eagles-Packers. The Eagles travel tomorrow, right? So nothing at NovaCare?
Doug is talking early in the morning. They scheduled, I think, at 10:30, but they're going to move it up. They haven't moved it up officially. But He'll be talking tomorrow morning. And then the Eagles will leave and head out to Titletown in beautiful Appleton, Wisconsin.
There we go. All right. At JF McMullen, give him a follow. And, of course, 97.3 ESPN.com. Thank you, pal.
All right. Thanks.